You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Good to see you, Mike.
Hi, Kate. Great to be here.
Oh, it's another exciting day at the hotel. Today in the Strategy Suite, we'll talk about the latest floor crossing as Teresa Watt becomes the 4th MLA to bail on BC United, joining John Rastad and moving to the Conservatives. We'll talk about the latest polls and who is picking up support from young voters and disenchanted Greens. Then we'll discuss some of the latest nominations. Lots to pick Geoff's brain on there. And we'll talk about how TransLeak is broke and what the leaders are saying they'll do about it. But first, our guest today, the Honourable Ravi Kahlon, is our first sitting minister to check into Hotel Pacifico. Minister Kahlon was first elected as the MLA for Delta North in 2017, has served as Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation through some critical years of COVID-19, and then doubled down on the critical portfolio thing, becoming Minister of Housing and House Leader under David Eby. So welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Minister Kahlon.
Kate, thanks so much for having me. Thanks, Mike, for the invitation. Looking forward to our chat today.
It's a really great time to have you around because it is the Olympics. And I can't help but ask, because I think you went to, was it Sydney and Beijing, 2000 and 2008 as part of the men's field hockey team?
Yeah.
Does that change what it feels like to watch it? Like, you must have some insight knowledge into what it feels like to be there.
Yeah, it's wild. Watching it every single time, all those kind of feelings and emotions that I had at that time, they come back to you like instantly, right? Like most people don't know that when we see the opening ceremonies, we see, people come in and waving. What they don't see is you 3.5 hours sitting in a holding room, waiting for your moment. And actually coming out is special, but being in this giant kind of holding area with thousands of athletes from all over the world for 3 hours is actually the best part. Because you get to meet people from different countries. Everyone is excited. You've got NBA stars, tennis stars, and then you've got people who play amateur sports, and they're all in their pretty pumped up to be able to walk out behind the flag. And so very excited, heartbroken for our women's soccer team, like just gut punch for me, knowing what athletes go through to get there, the excitement for their families and to have that. But, excited, basketball, rugby, the women's rugby team right now is playing in the finals, and that's hopefully not dating the program, but super excited about watching our athletes compete.
What was that moment like when you realized that you were going to go to the Olympics for the first time? How'd that feel?
Mike, when I got the call to say that I made the team that's going to the Olympics, I had just returned from a tour where basically there was a tryout, and we were in Europe. I landed, I unpacked my bags. It was like 11 at night. The coach called me and he said, hey, Ravi, congratulations. You're going to the Olympics. We selected you for the team. And I was just turned 21. And so I was the young guy on the team. And there was, obviously the veterans. I was the youngest. And I went to sleep and I woke up in the morning and I was like, I had the best dream, like I had this dream that I was going to the Olympics, and the coach called me. And so I said to my family, this is my dream. And they're like, well, your coach called you last night. I was like, what? And I went and checked my phone, and and I had talked to him. And so it was this like surreal moment of just shock and excitement. And I know how exciting it is for our athletes. And like I said, many of them have put, 15, 20 years of hard work, their families, the commitment that their families have put through, especially amateur athletes. There's no money in it. You're doing it for love of sport. I used to work. I used to train in the morning at 7 a.m. I'd go to this towel factory and drive a forklift all day, and then train at lunchtime, and then go train in the evening. And so that's what our athletes do. And anyways, super exciting, and looking forward to seeing what happens.
I did do some opposition research on you in preparation for the show. I can't recall whether you were a Tiger or a Panther in your earlier athletic career. Was it a Panther?
Tigers. Yeah, well done.
Well, you were a Tiger.
Yeah.
But no one would cough up any negative sporting attributes. I wondered whether you were a floater or weak on the back check. But I was told you have a very hard, accurate shot So
I was a little bit tough cookie on the field. Maybe that's why they're still not wanting to share those things, you know. But
they're worried. They're worried. But yeah,
yeah,
so you have a hard, accurate shot in that, and you took that into politics. What made
you
you
know,
want to go the political route first as a staff member, right?
yeah. Well, the skills in a weird way out of sport to anything you do is transferable. Like the things I learned in sport, you know, around discipline, around focus, around how to handle pressure and to be focused when kind of everything around you is going haywire, just being the kind of the calm in the middle of that. All those are things that you learn in sport. You know, I sometimes catch myself taking deep breaths, and then I'm like, hey, wait a minute, I used to do that when I was in sport. When I ran for politics, the first thing that I ended up doing was my eating schedule become fixed. My training schedule, I'd go for runs in the morning. I didn't do it on purpose. It just intuitively happened as a routine that I
Mm.
need to do. So, you know, I always say that if you ever want to hire somebody that's played high level sport, hire someone who's been to the Olympics because there's unique insights that you get from that experience that makes you very employable and actually a really good asset on the team. You know, the other thing you learn is that you don't have to get along with all your teammates.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay not to be along with all your teammates. It's okay not to like your teammates. But you
Okay,
know,
so who don't you get along with?
well, you know, I'm lucky. I get
Spill the
along with
tea.
everybody.
Oh, okay,
I
okay,
got friends, you know, and that's the other thing about sport, right? Like I've got friends that are on the BC United. I've got friends that now,
yeah,
well, maybe not as many on the BC Conservative side, but I've got friends in Greens, like Adam. You had Adam on last week.
yeah.
You know, I love Adam. I think Adam is an amazing human being, and he and I get along great. And that's what you learn in sport, right? You're doing your
Yeah, but like,
thing, you're going competitive, but when you step away, we're human beings, and we got to treat each
Mm.
other like human beings.
well, so we've had some really interesting conversations about transferable skills at Hotel Pacifico. Like, just lots of folks talking about, I mean, early on, I think we had some good conversations about the assumption when you come out
Yeah.
of the business world, particularly the large corporate world, this sort of like idea that there's a lot of transferable skills that'll make politics feel easy. And often it's the reverse. And it gets
Yeah.
at a little bit the point you just made, because I think on a in a corporate world, especially if you're more senior, you have a bit more ability to sort of bring along the folks you want and fire someone if you don't. I
Yeah.
mean, it's Donald Trump's whole persona. You
Right.
know, on a sports team or in politics, you have a set cast around you, and it's a
Yeah.
very different type of leadership and collaboration, and an environment where collaboration is critical. I want to stick on the point, sorry, of transferable skills and ask you a question, because I know you come from a background, your family comes from the small business world.
Mhm.
And that's an experience you've leveraged and talked about, you know, bringing it into politics. Can we talk a little bit, because we sort of talk about folks who come from small business and we talk about people who come from the corporate world as though they both bring, you know, sort of the right kind of economic manager skill set. And I have a theory that they're actually quite different. Should we stop lumping those two groups together? And what does the small business skill set bring that you
Well,
like?
you know, I always am challenged by kind of the framing when it comes to this. Like, you know, if you're a small
Yeah.
business, you're this. You've worked for a corporate company, you're this, and you should have this view. Or if you work for energy mines, you should have this view. That is not the case. People are fluid. They have different ideas and different thoughts. You know, for myself, I always say that I am a tight fiscal manager. And the reason why is not because I worked in banking. Not because my mom ran a small business for almost 10 years. It's because I grew up in an immigrant household where we were counting pennies and quarters and at that time dollar bills because you know it's hard to make it when you're part of a family that just came here and you know trying to make do. And so I think that it's people's life experiences more than their jobs that perhaps make you to where you are now. But I did learn a ton when we were in the restaurant. I always joke my mom ran a restaurant. My mom came to Canada, by the way, didn't speak English. She learned how to speak English washing dishes at a restaurant, at a Greek restaurant. She speaks Greek,
Mm.
so she learned Greek and English, and then worked at that restaurant for many years, and then found herself years later going back and buying that same restaurant and running it for 10 years. And the restaurant was owned by Andrew Weaver's family.
Wow.
And so we bought
Wow.
the restaurant from Andrew Weaver's family. And so it just shows you how politics can come together, but how
Yeah.
amazing my mom is.
Was there a moment after you were like, did you go talk to Andrew Weaver about this? Like,
So I'll tell you the craziest story. In the legislature, my mom came for the first time. She doesn't come. She never came. My dad, when he was alive, he never came. My mom showed up one time, and so I got a chance to recognize her. And it was a proud moment. She's looking down. We used to come to the legislature, never thinking that we could be in the inside. It was just a thing that you do as a tourist. And so I was recognizing her, telling everyone about how amazing she is and what she's done in the restaurant that she worked at. I named the restaurant, and Andrew Weaver beelined it to me. And he said, "Did you just say Scott's Diner?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "That was my family's restaurant." And he starts naming everybody. And I'm like, "Yeah, that's my uncle." Like, they weren't my real uncles, but they were my uncles because I went every weekend to families to spend time with them. And so, yeah, Andrew and I have a kind of a unique bond because of that experience. And so I brought my mom down, took pictures with Andrew. It was a pretty special moment.
Well, we might circle around back to Andrew in a little bit here.
Yeah.
But so let me just go back in the time machine 2 years and a change. You had already, well, you were elected in 2017. You spent some time as a private member. You were elevated to cabinet, had some big responsibilities, as Kate noted, on the jobs file. But by the summer of 2022, you were seen as a leading contender to be the leader. And, no one knew when John Horgan would step down as premier, or if he would, or whenever. But when he did, it all happened rather suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of speculation about you. There was a lot of buzz about you, and you had a big decision to make. So unpack that for us. Like, what was going through your mind when you heard that Premier Horgan was going to step down, and you probably knew inevitably that people were going to be calling you?
Yeah. Well, first it was sadness
Yeah.
because, Premier Horgan was phenomenal, phenomenal human being, just a great leader, give people space to be able to grow and learn. And then, yeah, it was like, holy crow, this is happening. And so, I did engage with a lot of folks from my team. There was a lot of folks coming to me and saying, yeah, you got to do this is your moment. But the things that matter most are family when it comes to this decision. And I know sometimes it's a cliche where people are like, oh, my family. For me, it's my dad had just passed away. And so for me, it was always like, life is short. What matters most to me? And there was actually two moments that actually struck me, because one was when I first called my family to tell them that Premier Horgan was stepping down. My son was in tears. And I thought it was because he's going to miss John, because, John used to come over and play Lego with my son. Like, that's the type of person John and this Premier Horgan is. And he was upset because he thought I was running and I was going to be away more. And so that hit me pretty hard, right? So I said, you know what? He's a kid. He's going to come along. Then probably 2 weeks later, I went to pick him up from his friend's house, and then his friend's mom said to me, "Hey, how's Navin? How's he doing?" I said, "Oh, he's doing great. Like this and that, a lot of happening." And she said, "Oh, well, my son came into bed with me last night and said that your son is really sad because his dad's not going to be around for him as much anymore." So that was my moment of like, I can't do this. If the family's not there, what else is there? So the decision for me was pretty clear. I met with the Premier, EB at the time, and I said, "Hey, I want to talk." And I think he was thinking, "Hey, we're talking ground rules." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not running." And he was kind of shocked. And I think a lot of people were. But, I love my job. I love what I'm doing. But it doesn't define me as a human being. And so if I can continue to do it, that's great. But I never worry about these things, Mike. And Geoff knows that as well. I know he covers he's on your show. And we'll see where the future takes my opportunities as we go forward.
Can we talk a bit though? Like it's not as though, so you're not premier, but like it's not as though you're like have a sleepy job right now. Like, can I just ask, like, in terms of what your work-life balance looks like and what you're sort of, what does this current role afford you in terms of contact with particularly with your family, right?
Yeah. Well, I have one speed. I don't have a slowdown, and my team is forcing me to take days off so everybody else can have days off. And so I'm a pretty go 100% type of person. I'm a 5:30 in the morning wake up person. I do my little bit of exercise. I read everything. I listen to everything. I listen to your podcast. I listen to anything that touches housing. And so, my view is if you're going to do something, do it to your best and do it at 100%. My family does accept me as who I am. It's kind of how I got to the Olympics. I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't necessarily the strongest, but I knew I would outwork everybody else. And so, but I do build in lots of time for my family. My son loves to play sport. I try to be at every single weekend sport event, regardless. Sometimes he doesn't even want me there because there's added pressure, but I have to be there. And so I try my best to create that balance where I'm at home at night when bed needs to be tucked in, etc. But in this job, it's hard, and all of you have worked in this field. And whether you're on the elected side or whether you're, doing the work as leading the province through staff, it's go, go, go. And there's always an issue that happens. And so, it's a struggle to find that balance, but I try to prioritize it the best I can.
Well, your support for Premier Eby was a decisive move in that leadership race. And I'm going to assume that you have a lot of political capital with the Premier as a result. Now, did you ask for housing? Is that something you specifically wanted to take on when he formed his first cabinet?
Yeah, no, I didn't. And I supported Premier Eby off the top because I thought he was the best option. People that know me, I'm not like, oh, I'm going to put my chips here. I don't do that. If I feel strongly about something, because I can't fake it. I'm not good at faking it, and so I believed he was the person that was the best from our team to do that work. And so as with Premier Horgan, he called me about economic recovery in the middle of the pandemic. I didn't sleep for 2 weeks. I was like, man, what the heck? What's going to happen here? And how are we going to navigate this? And I had a similar feeling when Premier Eby called me about housing. It was kind of like, okay, well, let me catch my breath here and figure out how we're going to get around it. And so I didn't ask for it, but I did say I'll do anything. And so I guess I can't complain when someone says that to you.
Can you talk to us a bit about like that, getting the housing offer? Can you if you're doing like a pros and cons list like what's your pros and cons list for becoming Minister of Housing?
Well, pros for me is that when I first got elected, I think it was actually Geoff Meggs that called me and said, hey, you're going to be parliamentary secretary for multiculturalism and anti-racism. So I built an anti-racism strategy and they asked me to create a human rights commission for British Columbia. That was my first job. And then economic recovery was obviously stressful. And so for me, pros on the housing side was I'm built for this. I worked in banking. I worked on human rights issues. I worked on economic recovery, and housing is all of those things together. You can't have a strong economy unless you have housing. I heard that from employers all the time. We can't attract talent because there's not housing available. And so I kind of felt like, all right, I'm built for this kind of moment. But the cons are there's no easy solution. There's no flip of a switch that's going to solve this problem. We have structural challenges when it comes to housing. The system of housing is not working. It's not working for young families. It's not working for people who already have housing. Maybe it works for them a little bit more than it works for everyone else. It's not working for people who are actually wanting to build housing. And so there are some cons to it. And of course, when people are frustrated and they don't have housing, you're the one they point to. And I get that when I'm just walking around in neighborhoods. So there are pros and cons, but again, when the leader says to you, you're doing this, you're doing it and you're doing it with the best you can.
So what's your well, I was going to ask what your definition of success is on the housing file and how long do you think it's reasonable to expect reaching that level of success?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. And, if you look at the changes that we've made in the last year, I can't imagine any jurisdiction that would see the result immediately, although we are seeing some of that. I talk to people, I get randomly pulled over by people who are like, hey, I just got into a house that was a short-term rental, like literally all the time. I hear from people that are building housing. They're like, I was sitting on years waiting for a local government to approve my project, and now they're calling me. And so not-for-profits are like, we used to beg to try to get on the council agenda, but now with housing targets and having to build certain amount of affordable housing units, we're at a working group now on a table trying to find solutions. So the impacts are already there. But, if you've got people that are living in an RV and they're working full-time jobs and they don't have housing, well, then you haven't reached success. If you've got people that are living in an encampment because they got rent evicted and they don't have anywhere to go, you don't have success. And so when do you reach success is when everybody has housing. And that may be some time from now. But and that's what drives me, right? And it's great to hear the positive stuff, but I know there's a lot of people still struggling in our communities.
Yeah, there's not a state with this file where you stand in front of a mission accomplished
No,
banner.
definitely
I don't
not.
think. I wanted to move to the politics a bit of housing, because I think one of the things, and we've talked about a lot on this pod, is it's sort of this really interesting piece, how politically I think it's kind of reshaping things a bit. I'll enter the question with an anecdote. Actually, recently I was talking to my neighbor over the weekend who'd come back from a holiday in the Okanagan and sort of was lamenting, right? Like, oh, we couldn't get an Airbnb because our government's got rid of them all. And I had to pay through the nose for a hotel. And this is sort of, homeowner, right? I think he's probably in his late 40s. The demographics of how people react, I'll pick on the Airbnb policy piece. Demographics, I feel like, is driving a lot of how people react compared to sort of traditional political allegiances. How are you, as you're kind of making these, how are you hearing some of these policies received, and what are you seeing, particularly from young voters?
Yeah, well, when we just released last week the data that we got, part of our legislation was that all the platforms had to share with us how many listings they have and where they are. And so we now know there's approximately 55,000 short-term rentals that are listed in British Columbia. That is huge. That is a lot of housing that is in the short-term rental space. And so, in my position, I'm saying, how do we ensure that not only are we able to get some of that housing back for people in our community, but also breaking that trend line, because we were seeing a 10%, 20% increase year over year of more investors buying those properties and moving them into this space. And so, we started at the position of like, there's housing, it's accessible, it's something that we can get back, whether they rent it long term or whether they sell it to somebody who maybe has their first home, that we leave to people. And so that was the first analysis. And I'm sure it's playing differently with different populations. I hear from folks who, and I always, the Okanagan conversation I always find interesting, because Kelowna, for example, had, like, our legislation actually doesn't impact Kelowna at all, because Kelowna already had a principal residence requirement. That was their law already. West Kelowna isn't even captured in our legislation because their vacancy rate is above it. And so maybe there is a bit of perception, or maybe because now we have rules in place and the way to administer and support Kelowna in administering their rules, there's maybe some less listings. But it is the challenge of the optics of it. And I think, that example you share is one where, it may be an inconvenience to someone who wants to go for a holiday. But I look at it from the flip side, which is, what about everybody else that's struggling for housing, and rents are going up because there's limited supply available? And so we have to balance the two.
I mean, it's interesting. Just to pick up on it, because there's also, like, on the density piece, like the density piece is functionally kind of like it goes back to a kind of like remove red tape kind of anti-bureaucracy type piece, right? Yeah. But then it's sort of, it's interesting because I'd say this is generally, but tends to be younger voters who hear, good things out of that, and then older voters who might be more of that kind of conservative leaning, who kind of hear in it, maybe a threat to the character of their neighborhood, maybe, a concern that they won't be able to park on their street easily anymore, things like this. Like, I'm wondering, like, do you hear, I mean, let's pick up on the density piece just a little bit, because I think, and staying kind of in Greater Vancouver area, this is the transit-oriented density piece, I think, was really shocking for people. I think a lot of people were looking around going, like, 8 stories here, 12 stories here, in places that have single family homes on 30-foot lots. And it's a shock if you live there for 30 years, right? It's a shock.
Yeah. And this is why it's difficult for local governments to make decisions to approve housing. This is why we're in the challenge we're in now. Structurally, the system's not it's not working. And I was door knocking in my community last weekend. Last weekend, and so I did 2 days of 4-hour door knocking, and so it was interesting. It's fascinating when you knock on doors and you hear from people in your community. I had everything from I can't believe the NDP is the most pro-housing party in the country, and now the BC Conservatives are the NIMBYs. That idea of that kind of allowing the market to be able to build is, people don't associate that with the BC NDP, for historic reasons. And so there was a little bit of like, what the heck's going on here? I'm confused. But then there was also, there were some elements of people saying, well, I love my community. I don't want it to change. But I always say two things. One, whether we want our communities to change or not, they have been changing. The structures may not have been changing, but who can afford to live in our communities has been changing for years. Because if you don't allow for housing, you're only going to have wealthy folks coming in. You're not going to have the young families. There's a reason why there's no trick-or-treaters in neighborhoods anymore. Young families can't afford to live in those communities. So how do we create those opportunities? On the flip side, I had this woman on the door on Sunday who invited me into her home. I sat down with her for half an hour, which was lovely. And it was that very question that you asked, Kate, which was, what about the look of my community, the feel of my community? And so, my question to her was, is it the structure of the house that you have issue with, or is it the amount of people? And because if you have a single family home, you could easily have 10 people, 12 people, 14 people living in it. But what you're going to have is parking for only the single family home, and only taxes being paid towards infrastructure by that single family home. And so why not allow the same amount of people to live in smaller units in that building, but have the adequate amount of parking and have them paying proper taxes so that it can go towards the infrastructure in a community? And that was the big aha moment for her, because it helped reframe the thinking. But it's always a challenge in communities, and we just have to find a way to get to saying yes. Because if we don't find a way to getting yes, we're going to have a housing crisis not only for next year, the year after, and so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to unlock housing supply. Allow the private sector to be able to build housing without all this red tape, without having to first have the community engage in a community plan and then have to go through the same process all over again. But the only way we're going to do it is if we understand that if we don't, we're going to continue to have the challenges.
This is a pretty big philosophical shift. We've talked about it in the past on the show, that often a lot of the community-based planning that was being advocated over the years was coming from the left, loosely speaking. Bob Williams, who passed away recently, would be an example of that. And you're coming in as provincial minister, some would say with a hammer and a naughty list as well, and trying to with blunt instruments, trying to shape housing supply from the top down onto municipalities. And so how would you describe your relationship right now with municipalities and trying to get them to come along on the ride here to increase housing supply?
Well, I have a good relationship with most local governments, to be honest with you, because my view when I meet with them is we may not agree, but I'll always come here and listen to you, and I'll be frank with you about what I need to do, what I need to see for housing for people. And I'll hear from you about what you need. But in the end, if we're all agreeing that we have a housing crisis, if we're all agreeing we need to do something different, the status quo is not going to solve the problem. Doing things the way we were always doing them and hoping for a different result, I mean, they say that's insanity. That literally is insanity. And so, that's the debate I'm having with West Vancouver right now. Over 90% of communities in the province said, you know what? Yes, we'll allow the small scale multi-unit housing, small variances on policies in each community. West Vancouver is the only community that said no. And it's not fair for a community like West Vancouver to say, we're going to be an exclusive club. We like our big homes. We don't want, if these people want housing, they can go to Surrey. They can go to Maple Ridge and Mission. Well, by the way, that's where those people are going, and they're working for West Vancouver. So they're commuting over that bridge every single day. I think West Vancouver reports that 80% of their employees are coming from outside of the North Shore. Like, that's craziness. And so how are you going to attract people to work at the hospital, to work for your city, to work in the port, if you don't allow for more attainable housing to be built in the community? And so we need to shake the things up. And we're not just making it up. I mean, the research has shown us that this is the path. Ontario had a housing task force that said exactly what we're doing. BC had a task force. We had people from left, right, up, down, all political spectrums saying this is the best course of action. And so, I think, I guess my view is we need to take action, and the steps we're taking are going to unlock housing in a way that we haven't been able to do.
What do you say though when Mayor, and I'm thinking of Mayor Hurley because I attended his State of the City address a couple months ago in Burnaby, who was making the case that, hey, we had a good plan. We are leaders in driving housing starts here. Look at these towers all over Burnaby, and the provincial approach is slowing us down.
Yeah, I mean, I would respectfully disagree. And, I did meet with the mayor and council just recently, and I said, is it possible that interest rates and global inflation are causing a slowdown? Is it possible that there's other factors beyond our legislation that might be a challenge for many of the home builders that want to build housing in your community? And the answer, of course, is yes, because it's happening across the country. Every jurisdiction is dealing with the similar challenges. And in fact, with Burnaby, like if you look at their small scale multi-unit rules that they brought in place, they're actually the best in the province. So I give them 100% kudos. Everyone should be looking at them and saying, look what they've done. And because their own housing task force recommended the changes we're making. And so I know it's tough in community to agree on everything, but the experts have been pretty clear that this is the path forward, and it's tough decisions. And but both of you know that sometimes in government you got to make tough decisions because they're the right ones, and that's what I feel we're doing here.
So what's going to happen? Like we're moving into now in the pre-election season. And, I think we've been talking for some time about how the sands have been shifting beneath the feet of BC United leader Kevin Falcon. But I think what's becoming increasingly clear is they're also shifting beneath the feet of your government, and that voters are just increasingly pissed. Like voters are just increasingly kind of in this mood of like, you know what, this isn't working. And I need something different. And we can pick up a bit more on maybe where there's sort of where this is coming from. But I want to draw on your experience working on a file like housing, right? Like how do you balance the fact that people are probably right to be pissed?
Yeah.
And as the sitting government, like you don't want to get governmentitis. Like you can't kind of sit there and go, and we did this, and we did this, and we did this, because pretty easily as a voter, you're like, so what? Like I still can't afford a house, and I'm still struggling every month to make the math, work on my household budget. So what's going to happen from the BC NDP as we head into this election period in terms of how are you going to convince voters that you're the ones to fix it when you've already been in power? What are we at now? 7 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that first is recognizing that people's struggles and challenges that they're facing are real. I never deny that people are feeling the pressure. Not everybody, of course, and some people are doing well, and some people are struggling. I think it's important to acknowledge that there's some challenges out there, and I've never been shy from that. But that's why we're doing the work we're doing. I mean, housing and healthcare are going to be the top issues. They are. I'm telling you, I hear it at the doorstep. And for us, compared to Rustad, he announced a healthcare platform with $4.1 billion of reduction of healthcare spending. And so, there's going to be a debate. We're going to have that debate. Per GDP funding, he wants to reduce. Fine. That's one way of doing it. We're going to have that public debate. On housing, we've got a plan of unlocking housing, and he's taken the NIMBY approach, saying let's just leave it to local governments, pretty much status quo where things were. We're going to have that debate. But it is weird on the doorstep, I'm going to tell you, because I see the poll numbers, and all of you are experts in this field. What also matters is what you hear on the doorstep. I had two people say they're going to vote Conservative when I was knocking doors, and they both said we're voting for Poilievre because. And I said to them, well, Polier is not the leader. And both of them said, we know it's Kevin Falcon. He's the leader. So these people thought Kevin Falcon was a leader of the BC Conservative Party. And so I have not knocked on a door where a person said, I know who John Rustad is. I have not. Anytime Conservatives come up.
So, when you got reelected in 2020, and you were looking ahead to a four-year term, I'm sure no one had BC Conservatives on their bingo sheet for what the next election was going to look like.
Yeah.
So how is that? What's it been like to within the NDP to have to pivot? And at what point did you realize that it wasn't? I mean, who knows what's going to happen? But when it was looking a lot less likely that Kevin Falcon was your main contender, and now it's John Rustad.
Yeah, we've actually on our side we've been since I would say January, where we thought this was a real thing, just because you could see it's this brand, right? I mean, people understand a conservative brand, and it's hard to articulate to people about a new brand without years of branding. And again, you are all experts on that. It's a challenge, and so when their ads weren't successful, it was kind of an indication that they're going to be in a real challenge. It is going to be interesting again. We'll see. Campaigns matter, especially when you have a party that has incumbents, all of them over one side. It's like, Rustad didn't just show up. He was sitting beside Kevin Falcon as a minister in a BC Liberal government. And, I did think that the United ad that they had just recently around the, reminding people that Rustad isn't the same as the Federal Conservative Party. I heard that on the doorstep. I didn't hear the people saying the ad, but that confusion, it's there. And Polier is popular amongst folks in communities. But I've had people say, yeah, I'm voting for Polier federally, but I'm voting for you guys provincially. And that is not new for the NDP. You get that amongst a certain population in some communities, in suburbs, where they're, one way or another, or they're federal liberal federally, and then they're NDP provincially. And so, the campaign is going to matter. The contact on the door is going to matter, and I'm of one of those people that I'm not writing Falcon off because they do have money, and he has more name recognition on the doorstep. So we have to treat all three parties with a kind of an open eye of what people may want to consider at the ballot box.
I want to thank you so much. I would love to keep you here, Minister Kahlon, a lot longer. I have so many questions. But how about we'll just say for now, we'll commit to have you back another time. It would be great to have you on again. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for the podcast. I love it. I think it's fascinating to hear people have great experience in this space, bringing their perspectives. And I'll come back if you have me.
Guess I'm currently dog sitting a corgi. If you haven't had the good fortune of spending some quality time with a corgi, I highly recommend it. They are naturally occurring comedy. This dog has satellite dish ears, turkey drumsticks for legs, and a method for climbing stairs that is a bit like an inchworm, but like a furry high-speed inchworm. This dog, his name is Tyson, also has a delicate stomach and a deep distrust of mid-sized SUVs, which, as a middle-aged mom, is obviously what I drive. It's comforting to know that if Tyson gets into something, or more likely my children feed him something he probably shouldn't have, we can avoid getting in the car and instead access veterinary care virtually. TELUS Health My Pet provides comprehensive veterinary care for cats and dogs through an easy-to-use smartphone app. Because approximately 75% of pet telemedicine appointments can be treated solely through virtual care. This service connects pet owners with local veterinarians to address a range of health issues, from nutritional management and parasite control to behavior challenges and some prescriptions. TELUS Health My Pet is a quick, convenient way for pet owners to get medical advice without long wait times or the stress of in-person visits, which is especially beneficial for newly adopted pets and those in remote areas. Or for corgis like Tyson, who may have speed inchwormed their way downstairs into the basement and found the stash of leftover Halloween candy, including cheesies, that I thought I'd hidden thoroughly. I'm not sure how else to explain the orange dusting on his whiskers. Or how I can blame this one on the kids.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
All right, gang's back together. Good to see you, Geoff.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you all.
All right. Mike, you are you just back from San Francisco? Why did you want to?
I was just down in San Francisco visiting my older daughter down there, and I went to BC Legislature South, which is also known as Alcatraz. And it brought back some memories, actually, when we did a little Alcatraz tour, and that was like, boy, this place feels like the BC Legislature.
Oh my God.
And I said to my younger daughter, I said, is this the first time you've ever seen a jail? And she goes, no, you showed me the jail Keith Baldry showed me the jail at the BC Legislature. And I said, oh, yeah, right. So anyway, hey, there are some parallels.
There are some parallels.
But I did try
both on an island.
That's right. But I did try a Waymo. Do you know what a Waymo is? It's a driverless car.
Oh,
it's Google.
Yeah.
Does it, and they're all over San Francisco. And I actually have a Waymo app now. And you just book it, and it shows up. This driverless car shows up, and the doors open, and you jump in the back seat or the passenger seat. You're not allowed to sit behind the wheel, and off it goes. And it was the most bizarre experience.
Yeah, how comfortable were you, like, surrendering yourself to this?
I felt pretty safe, actually. And we were actually, the Waymo got into the intersection to turn left, and then it didn't make the turn because people were running the red light and everything. And so it just stayed and back kind of stayed tucked in a little bit. And then it changed its mind and went the other way after all. So they kind of make decisions on the fly, which is pretty interesting how fast these things, they're surrounded by cameras that got all these different angles. Anyways, check out Waymo if you're down in San Francisco, because the future is probably coming here.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, next 5-10 years will be Waymos all over Vancouver, if governments allow them here. But that was my my glimpse of the future. Now, we should probably
let's stay in the present.
Today.
Let's stay in the present.
Look at the political future.
Yeah,
we were just talking to someone who was hammering on Airbnb. Now he's going to have to hammer on Waymo, I guess.
Yeah, the new tech revolution.
First Uber, now Waymo. What will the taxi lobby say now? Oh boy.
Okay. Well, no, we're going to start with something decidedly low tech, which is floor crossings, because as we're recording, the news is breaking that Teresa Watt has crossed the floor from BC United to the Conservatives. I think, like, I'm going to start with you, Mike, because I was just trying to think, like, of the floor crossings we've seen, which is 4 to join Rustad. The other folks at Eleanor Storko, Lauren Dirksen, they're newer, right?
Yeah.
Versus
and Brisbane
Teresa
too.
Watt. Yeah. So, like, Teresa Watt, though, been with BC United since 2013.
2013 election, she was recruited as, I used the phrase somewhat carefully, but quote unquote star candidate. She was a big recruit for Christie in Richmond as a Chinese speaking candidate, which not easy to find sometimes. And she made a big difference for the slate heading into what was a tough election. And what was particularly interesting about Teresa is that she had actually worked with Geoff in a previous iteration during the NDP government.
A good friend, yeah.
In a communications role, I guess, previously.
Yeah,
right?
She was recruited to work in the communications role because we absolutely needed someone who was bilingual in Chinese, and she is, which is a factor people often miss. Sometimes people who come out of the Chinese Canadian community are not that fluent in Chinese, whether it's Cantonese or Mandarin. She's excellent at Mandarin and quite good at Cantonese, or the other way around, I can't remember, but very fluent. She was head of communications for the administration of Hong Kong before the handover, so she had lots of professional qualifications.
And so she's been MLA for 11 years, and the Conservatives had not nominated anyone in Richmond, and I think obviously they were holding off, hoping that she would come over, and now she has, and now there's 5 Conservative MLAs, and we're down to 23 BC United.
I thought it was interesting that the news was broken by the BC United media department, who obviously wanted to make sure there was no surprise about her announcement. But she's very capable, and I think she was quite unhappy with some of the changes that occurred after I can't remember which election, but she was demoted to the backbench for a time. That caused consternation in the Chinese Canadian community because she was, a senior minister under Christy Clark, and during the leadership changes that the BC Liberals went through, she had her ups and downs. Wound up back on the front bench again, but she's sitting there looking at an absolute certainty to get reelected as a BC Conservative and to become a senior minister. Whereas if she stays with BC United, or had stayed with BC United, she would be a backbencher maybe a critic, but in a very small caucus. So away she went.
Well, and so she's likely looking at some of the polls I know we're all looking at too, because today we have a new Research poll that has the Conservatives within striking distance of the NDP, with 41% supporting the David Eby government and 38% saying they would cast their ballot for the BC Conservatives. I think there's a lot to pick apart in here. I mean, I'm not going to start with the obvious, actually, just the closeness, because I do want to ask one of the things, Geoff, I wanted to touch base with you on is just, it's interesting to me that poll has young voters moving to the Conservatives, and then the loss of the erosion of the vote from the Greens also going to the Conservatives. That must surprise the BC NDP right now.
Well, I think we're seeing a resetting in some respects back to what was the status quo, where basically BC Liberals and BC NDP were fairly close for many years in terms of their share of the popular vote, but the Liberals were successful at election time. The decline now is got some interesting features to it. One is that what I think is most interesting about this actually is the fact that, and Mario Conseco points this out, that the most important issue for people now is homelessness, poverty, and housing. And it's always been up there, but now it's the issue. And I think what it's a proxy for is the economic struggles that people are facing right across the board, unless they're rich, in the face of higher interest rates and inflation. And we see this on the news all the time, but there's a lot of people out there who are wondering if they're going to be able to keep their house, or they have a mortgage, which they can't afford. And in the last couple of years, they've seen their disposable income decline if they're not in the highest income brackets. So inequality in British Columbia has always been an issue, never debated. It may be debated in this election because I think a lot of the disaffection flowing to the Conservatives is for that reason. I'll just add too that the NDP's supporters tend to vote more if they're in the older categories, which is where a lot of them are. And we need to see whether or not younger voters are going to turn out for the Conservatives when they really don't know, as Ravi Kahlon was saying earlier, that much about John Rustad. They just know that he's not the status quo. And I think that's the kind of dynamic we're facing.
Well, I mean, let's look at Research Co. Mario Conseco's body of work here. Just glancing at the screen, and he's in the field fairly regularly. And this is an online survey, not an IVR, and you've heard me talk in the past that there's some differences there. The online tends to not show the Conservatives as close to the NDP as the IVRs do. Now, in this case, it's 3 points. And I go back and I look at January, and it was 21 points.
Right.
And I look at Research Co. in April, and it was 18 points. And I look at Research Co. in May, and it was 10 points. And I look at Research Co. in June, and it was 7 points. And today it's 3 points. So it's like, I think I see a trend here. And, BC United's, been going the other way in the Research Co. tracking from 17 down to 9 now. So clearly the race has been tightening over time. As the pollsters say, it is a weird situation, as Minister Kahlon was saying, because it's like there's some voter confusion and so forth. It's still not there yet for the Conservatives because what you say, Geoff, the turnout, the turnout model would say it's not really 3 points; it's probably like 5 points. If these numbers were frozen,
I didn't have time to really dig deep to it, but
still older people vote more, right?
Yeah, but there's still voters available to the Conservatives if you look at who would consider voting for them all over the place. And this is what I think several people have mentioned in the past, Kate, that there's a very angry electorate out there. on a whole bunch of fronts, and it's not clear how that will play out electorally. The problem for, I think, David Eby and his team is that although people like David Eby and they think he's capable and that he cares, they haven't defined Rustad, and people are able to color in the lines around Rustad as they see fit. They project onto him what they'd like to see. So this controversy over the healthcare platform, in some respects, when asked what his healthcare platform is, Rustad says, well, what do you want it to be? I'll be everything. We'll reduce waiting lists, this, that, and the other thing. So they're going to be turning it into a debate, obviously, on whether will you cut? What are your real commitments there? So the challenge for the New Democrats in the coming period is to define Rustad and identify what they think is wrong with him, and him to say why that's not the case. And I think he's going to have some uphill struggle on that front. Unfortunately, for those of us who love to watch this, I don't think it's really going to begin until after Labor Day. What do you think, Mike? I mean, I think it's going to be in a phony war for a while here.
Yeah, well, it's barely a month away, so we don't have to wait too long.
No.
Popcorn will just be out of the microwave at that point.
Weeks.
But, the Conservatives, poll after poll builds this scenario that it's going to be them and the NDP. And in the latest Research Co numbers, definitely shows Conservative strength in the interior, and then strong, and also strong in the Fraser Valley. So there's going to be NDP MLAs, Chilliwack, Abbotsford, Langley. They're going to be feeling the heat. And that would be the first place in the Lower Mainland the Conservatives are going to win seats. And then how far can they keep pushing into Metro Vancouver, Surrey? This Teresa Watt defection is important for the Conservatives. They need to win Richmond. They need to sweep Richmond if they're going to form government, and so on and so on. So obviously these numbers would be encouraging if you're Conservative. The floor crossing is encouraging. It's just more of the momentum narrative. At some point, we're going to come to a point of engagement when the light bulbs turn on and people say, well, what really is the offering here for everybody? And pour everything into that: anger, apathy, healthcare, housing, put it in the blender and see what comes out in October.
Well, let's take a look at some of the other candidates, because some of that's kind of interesting too. But before we leave Teresa, she gives them a voice in a huge market, which is the Chinese speaking market in the Lower Mainland, which goes all the way out to the Fraser Valley. And she's great on the radio and very combative. So this opens up a new front for them, which I don't think they were able to really work in at this point. So I agree with Mike. It's a big catch for them.
All right.
So the NDP of your buddies in the NDP have been nominating a slew of candidates. Geoff, what's the deal there?
Well, there's some non-surprises like Adrian Dix and Mabel Elmore, of course, running again. But I think we're seeing some really interesting ones coming around the Lower Mainland. I'll take a look at one where there was a contested nomination, which was a bit of was it an upset? I don't know. I wasn't there. Oak Bay Gordon Head, being held currently by Murray Rankin, who'd stepped down. Catherine Holt had run. She's from the Board of Trade, had worked as a public servant in the past in the BC government, but she was being opposed by Diana Gibson. Catherine Holt, Diana Gibson is a community activist, well regarded, been around the party a long time. Catherine Holt had John Horkin's nomination, but when the votes were counted, Diana Gibson got that nomination. So she will be running there, probably will be successful.
Not according to Dr. Andrew Weaver.
I know. Well, he's interesting.
Anyway, always an interesting
let's
take.
move right along.
Riding to watch to our top 10.
No
top
time
10
to
riding.
linger.
Nina Krieger's an interesting one. She was the director of the Holocaust Education Center in Vancouver for many years, and has seeking the nomination. Will get the nomination in Victoria Swan Lake, which is where Rob Fleming was the incumbent. Is the incumbent for now. So this is a very important one for the NDP to demonstrate its continued relationship with the Jewish community, because she is one of the important personalities there around the Holocaust Center. So very glad to see her putting her name forward. Not so happy news in Yaletown, where a confusing battle has erupted that I can't really illuminate. But Jeanette Ash, a college instructor, and was the candidate in the by-election against Kevin Falcon when he won a seat in Quilchena, longtime party activist, was in civic politics. She was getting ready to run in a nomination that kept getting delayed, because Terry Young, who is a Vancouver police officer and the executive of the office, VPD, but also been head of success and had senior roles in various Chinatown community organizations, has declared his interest, which was a surprise to Jeanette Ash, who thought he was a conservative. So Jeanette,
both of those candidates have famous political spouses.
Yeah, we better get them both on the table. So Jeanette Ash is the spouse of Kennedy Stewart, former mayor of Vancouver, and Terry Young is spouse of Sarah Kirby Young, a senior member of the ABC caucus at City Hall. So with Jeanette leaving the race with some dark but not explicit comments about the playing field being tilted, we see Terry there, I guess, as the only nominee. I'm not sure, but the nomination race, I think, has now been set for late August, which is quite late. Mm-hmm. And perhaps she was angry because it was late, and that was seen as a way of helping him get more sign-ups.
Libby Davies had weighed in on Jeanette Ash's side as well, not that long ago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's always a tension in political parties when you've got your loyalists who've been there through thick and thin, and then there's a growth mentality to reach out and bring new people in outside your traditional coalition to show that, you know, you're reaching for more and more votes, right, with the electorate. And that's what I kind of perceive the situation is that Team EB is saying like, hey, we've got Terry Young and we think he can do something for us to keep, you know, the forces of evil at bay. And I can also understand why Jeanette Ash, Kenny Stewart, Libby Davies would feel kind of raw about it.
Well, I think their view was that, you know, just let us have the nomination battle and get it over with, and let's have it in a reasonable time frame. And that seems to be the rub. I haven't talked to any of the direct participants because I think at the end of the day, and you referenced Teresa. I remember, Mike, there were some people who were pretty annoyed that Teresa became anointed the candidate in Richmond when she came along. And one of them was a police officer, if I recall correctly. But in any case, the voters get to make a decision at the ballot box, and they don't lose a ton of sleep over what's happening in internal nomination battles. And I think that you know, whatever one thinks about Terry or Jeanette, ultimately it's not going to matter at the ballot box very much. So they've left that one. There's some other interesting ones out there. George Anderson, who I don't know personally, is running in Nanaimo Lanceville. It's an interesting. He'll be running against Gwen O'Mahony, a former New Democrat who was actually elected in a by-election a number of years ago from Chilliwack. She's now moving to Nanaimo and running as a conservative. And the other one I'll mention, just because I think it's a bit of a watershed, I'd be interested in others' reaction, but Francine Joe, who's been working for the Native Women's Association and First Nations Emergency Services, is running in Merritt, Fraser Nicola, it's called. For two previous elections, the candidate there was Aaron Shumahetsa, who's the chief of one of the First Nations in that area. But I'm not sure what the field looks like against Francine, but it just shows that there are more and more Indigenous candidates coming forward across all of the parties.
Fraser Nicola can be an interesting one. The riding boundary shifted a bit. It's kind of gone into the Fraser Valley to include Agassiz and Harrison, almost all the way to Mission. But it's that's Jackie Taggart's seat, and she's a strong MLA, strong local MLA. And there's a conservative running, Tony Luck, who's I believe a city councillor in Merritt. So that riding is a classic case of a vote split could elect Francine Joe. Because the NDP usually aren't far off. They're usually breathing down Jackie Taggart's neck as is. And, you know, with Jackie still there and Tony Luck as a conservative, I would say the odds are the NDP probably could win that seat.
Well, years ago, Lytton, which is close to your heart, Mike, had a hospital with a number of hospital employees union members, and they were supporting Harry Lally. And I think we're important. A lot of Indigenous women work in healthcare facilities in that riding, and so they were mobilized really by the union as much as they may have been by their own concerns or interests about healthcare. And that was important to Harry back at that time. Whether that plays a role this time, I don't know. But it's
Harry, who's now supporting BC United. So.
Yeah, I know. Well,
at least last time I heard.
That's a long and tedious story. But anyway, I think it's very interesting to see the number of Indigenous candidates now coming forward, really great candidates with strong chances to win. I think it's going to change the complexion of the legislature a bit.
Yeah, and just going back to that Nanaimo Lanceville seat, you mentioned George Anderson. He's an interesting candidate. He's the chair of the university. Young guy, got elected when he was 21 to city council. He's older now. He's a lawyer. So I think that he's an interesting candidate. He's also a federal Liberal, because I saw one of the federal Liberal MPs celebrating his appointment as a provincial NDP candidate. Fair enough. And so Gwen O'Mahony and possibly Adam Walker running in that seat.
I couldn't find out what Adam's doing, but he, for their listeners who can't recall, was expelled from the NDP caucus and sat as an independent. But his Facebook shows him very, very busy in the community. So,
yeah, and it could be Ladysmith Parksville, could be Nanaimo Lanceville. His riding got split into two there.
yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, the NDP are playing catch up on nominations. That brings them up probably towards 70 or so, roughly. So they're getting their ducks in a row.
So last week we did mention the two new BC Conservative kind of star candidates, Yuri Fulmer and Melissa DeGenova. Did you want to talk about those, or maybe some of the BC United?
Well, just I think it's worth noting that BC United continues to nominate candidates in case anyone was wondering about it. And Mike Lee worked very hard to recruit a successor in Langara, who he feels very strongly about, Jamie Stein. And I noticed they've nominated candidates in Nanaimo Gabriola, which is never an easy candidate for BC Liberals to find. Even though I lived in the area at the time, the last two ridings I could find candidates for in 2013 were the two Nanaimo seats. Drove me crazy. And so the fact that they've got an Nanaimo candidate ahead of the election, I'm thinking, well, that's pretty good. And they've got nominated a candidate in Burnaby South Metrotown as well, which is not exactly and I saw actually Coquitlam, the Western Plateau seat, they put out an announcement today too. So they continue to move forward on candidates, and they're probably pushing 60 or over 60 now. So they're not going away. So poll numbers notwithstanding, there's still going to be candidates on the ballot in September, obviously.
Great. Let's pick this up then to like bringing this back to policy. I think there's one policy issue we should just touch on today, because we do have the news out of TransLink, sort of, and this was the mayors coming together to say, there's a $600 million hole in the budget. Gas tax revenues have plateaued. I think the ridership revenues are down because of a switch more to single tickets and away from sort of monthly passes. And basically saying, like, we've got until the end of 2025 to figure this out. And if you don't, in 2026, you're going to see like 50% of the bus routes evaporate. I think it was sort of 30% down on the SkyTrain. And then, and we're in a space now, we've seen sort of the leaders react. The clearest, I think, chorus coming from John Rastad to say, I'm not going to bail out TransLink. And then Premier Eby seeming to be more positive towards helping TransLink there. And I just want to like bring it back too, because I think we had, Brad West, was probably our first sitting mayor to come on, really emphasizing how important transit is going to be in this election, and is to a lot of that kind of, that place where you're talking, where we kind of, how far can the Conservatives push into Metro Vancouver? Well, can they push into it if they're not going to help out, if they're sort of walking away from TransLink? And Mike, if they're not sort of showing they have a plan for transit?
Well, I think the Conservative plan on TransLink is very political and very superficial, frankly. They're both saying they're going to crack down on making sure they're spending money properly. At the same time, they want more. They're saying they want the SkyTrain to get to Langley even faster and other things. And at some point the numbers don't work, right? Like it sucks to be in government sometimes when the numbers don't work. And we had this problem under Christie, which is the TransLink had a funding gap. In order to do the things we wanted to do, we had to wrestle with what are the alternatives? And we gave a little gas tax relief at the time and took a lot of flack for it, frankly. And eventually, there was a referendum which didn't work. And finally, Jeff's government came in, federal Liberals came in, and money got unlocked. But now the gas tax is plateauing and they need a new revenue source. And no one's really going to be that excited about that in this climate of affordability. But it's got to get done. Like, I think the challenge, TransLink, Scott, is that they're actually laying facts on the table that if you extrapolate these numbers, it will mean they're trying to, give it some color as to like this will be cut and that will be cut. West Coast Express will be cut and buses in the suburbs will be cut. That's a tricky balance, because I think people can look like you're just making threats. And so they really need to surface the nature of the problem with with the electorate to say, here is why we are short on money. It's, the gas tax sure is part of it, but what are those other pressures that so the light bulb can go on with people, like why they're really struggling? Because I actually think TransLink is a pretty lean organization. I think they have been well run since Kevin Desmond took over some years ago and restored confidence in TransLink, but they dealt with a lot of declining ridership over COVID, which is starting to come back now, or has come back almost. They've got the gas tax problem. They've probably likely got aging infrastructure, capital needs that they can't keep pace with, et cetera, et cetera. And it's
I
a
agree
tough
with
place
all
to
that.
be
I
in.
just think, it was a typical pre-election ploy by an organization to draw up a worst case scenario, but it's not completely fantasy. Where I think Rustad makes a mistake is that if he wants to make headway in suburban areas, people want transit. Working people, especially if he's going to attract those votes, they need it. I mean, anybody who's taken the early morning SkyTrain to Surrey knows that all those security guards, healthcare workers, you name it, are all heading home and half dazed because they can only afford to live in Surrey, even though they work downtown. And I think the danger for Rustad on a number of fronts is he makes broad brush statements like that are going to cut against him. TransLink's revenue now has got a larger share from the fare box than most other peer transit systems. In other words, average people are already carrying a ton of the load there, more so than they would in many other cities. So to say to them, well, it's okay, we're going to cut your service, and by the way, probably we'll raise your fares, it's just going to be toxic if anybody tries to get there. The other thing that's interesting too is that some of the services that TransLink said would have to be closed. I mean, we're over the top, like West Coast Express, like that was a very expensive service when it started, but is now considered absolutely critical to the development of all of those suburban ridings that Conservatives hope to win. So you can't say, well, we're going to turn down the bailout and suggest to people in those ridings that they're going to have to start driving to work. Everybody knows how tough that is.
2 swing ridings in Maple Ridge too, which is to their advantage in keeping the West Coast Express.
Yeah, I mean, they can't do it. It's nonsense. So the broader issue, though, which I think is problematic, is that for TransLink, they go ahead and they say they commit to the Broadway subway and they commit to the Surrey subway. Some of those decisions are made at higher levels. And then they come in with a bill, which is not their fault, in my view, that's way higher in terms of capital cost than they expected. And so what they thought would be enough to build 1.5 extensions turns out to be barely enough for one. And there are also continuing costs in terms of employee costs, wages, that kind of stuff. And you look at Metro and you look at TransLink and you look at the cities themselves with some of the infrastructure problems, there is a massive deficit developing, which is going to be a huge problem for some government, including the resilience necessary, say, to invest in new dikes and all the kinds of stuff we need to stop fires. It's a big issue, and it touches on people very directly. It's just not being debated that way.
Well, I think it's such a complex system, and on the Broadway subway, I mean, it's like the province is building it, but TransLink will operate it. So it does add operation maintenance over time that they'll have to service, but they can redeploy buses. But it's a complicated story to tell the public, right? And a lot of that service they want to get out to the burbs, out to Surrey, is that yeah, people want the service, but it's not as dense out there, so you're not getting as much return on the routes as you would in the city.
That's right.
So these are all vexing questions. I think everybody wants transit, but nobody wants to pay for it. And it's probably going to be a cocktail of fare increases, property tax increases, lots of stuff that people don't want to have happen, but it's going to have to happen. I don't think there's a magic wand here.
If you look at Burnaby, we talked about Burnaby, or you did earlier in the show with Ravi. I mean, the extension of the Millennium Line caused Burnaby. Like it was built and then they came. And what other countries do is, if they already have the density in a European country, for example, the density's there and they build to serve it, and then it can grow up from there. We have a problem here because we have not got a big solid metropolitan core like they would in Barcelona or Paris or something. And so we're spreading out and we're using the SkyTrain to do it. And it's going to be a bit more expensive, but that's just the way it is.
I do think the BRTs, the bus rapid transit that they're laying out now is the key. It's a lot cheaper. It'll be, I believe it'll be a good service. And I think it will help prove the future SkyTrain routes down the road. And I think we got to get off our fixation on SkyTrain for a little bit to bring things back into balance.
Yeah, well, the
Anyway.
bus rapid transit on Broadway became the busiest route in North America for many, many, many years, and now it's finally getting a SkyTrain. But I agree with you completely.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, and make the existing system and the existing network sustainable. Like this is a year.
Or hey, how about Waymo? Lots of Waymos. Let's bring it right back. We'll bring it right back.
That
It
was
should be
podcast
subsidized.
poetry.
Should be
Well
subsidized.
done.
There we go.
Well done, sir. Let's grab a drink.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
All right, who's kicking us off this week? Mike?
I'll start
Yeah.
because I didn't really have one and it just came to me. It's totally non sequitur.
Love the honesty.
Based on our nothing to do with our previous programming today, but it's been bugging me for a while, and that's Mark Carney. Have I even done this before? I'm not sure if I've taken a shot at Mark Carney
No,
yet.
you haven't.
I'm just so tired of hearing about Mark Carney maybe running for office or not running for office. It's like, okay, you know what? You've had your chance in 2019 and 2021 when he was free from Britain to run, and when he returned home. He could have run. He could have run last time. He could be the finance minister today. We could see what he's made of, but he didn't want to. It appears he wants to go straight to the top. Again, Prime Minister Trudeau's asking him to run. It's like a little humming and hawing. I know it doesn't look that appetizing to jump in at this point, but what the heck? You know, like get on the ice, dude. Strap on the pads and get out there. The analogy here is Bob Rae passed up an opportunity to run as Liberal in 2006. Then he ran for leader afterwards and lost. I believe in the deciding factor was he didn't strap the skates on and go in that previous election. Had he, I think he would have been the leader. It would have been a good one. But I think Mark Carney's too precious. And so I'm taking a shot at his preciousness. There you go.
So you won't be writing up any campaign slogans for him to show how
I have a new book called
Values is just the
coming
person
out.
to save working people. A tough pitch. I'm going to raise a glass to Jennifer Whiteside, Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, because she has a really tough job. But today, the Coroner Service reported that for the first time since 2019, we've seen a sustained, small, but sustained and real decline of 9% in the death toll from the opioid crisis. So it's still brutal. 6 people a day, British Columbians are dying of overdoses, but it was 7. And in these games, small gains can count for a lot. So one good day. This happens once a month that she gets the report, and for a while now, it hasn't been worse than before. So here's to her, and of course the countless other people working on this with her.
And one. I will also raise my glass. And I'll raise my glass to the representative for children and youth, Jennifer Charlesworth, who had a report out last week. Mike, I think you also raised this as something, we hoped we could talk about. There's just too much going on. But I'll, worth kind of summarizing, the point she makes that it's like 80% of social workers, after a survey of social workers found 80% say they can't do their job. Their caseload is just too big. And obviously this follows on the heels of the report on the death of the young boy that shows the very real cost of young Colby, the very real cost of this to children and also to the people who work in the system. So I want to raise my glass to her for the report. We'll keep looking to, I know there's actually a second part of the report that's going to come out. So I'm hopeful we'll get a chance to talk about it. But yeah, just wanted to.
I think we could take a shot at all political parties.
Yeah.
This problem has gone on for a long time through multiple administrations, and it deserves more attention for sure.
Well put, sir. Thank you. All right. With that, it's been another great episode of Hotel Pacifico. I want to thank our guest, Minister Ravi Kahlon, for joining us today. I also want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Check out time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.